When I stepped into the courtroom that morning, my daughter Mariah reacted exactly as I expected. She rolled her eyes and leaned closer to her husband, Cole, whispering something under her breath that made them both smile with quiet amusement. Then, without warning, something unusual occurred. The judge lifted his head from the stack of documents in front of him and fixed his gaze on me. His face went completely still, as if someone from his past had just walked through the door. Speaking in a low voice that barely carried across the room, he said that it was her. The entire courtroom fell into an uneasy silence. Attorneys stopped speaking mid-thought. Clerks froze with their fingers over their keyboards. Even the bailiff shifted awkwardly in place. Mariah's confident expression faltered, and Cole's face tightened with confusion. They did not understand the meaning behind those words, but I did. I had lived long enough to know when fate was beginning to shift. They believed I was nothing more than an elderly woman stubbornly clinging to a house. They were convinced they had already taken away every shred of my dignity. What they failed to understand was that I carried a history far older and far stronger than their greed. In Riverton, my mornings always followed the same pattern. I woke at 6 in the morning, poured water into my aging kettle, and reached for the chipped mug that had survived more than 20 years of daily breakfasts. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen as I tended to the African violets lined along the windowsill. My late husband Edwin had loved those flowers, and caring for them helped me feel close to him even after he was gone. My life was never extraordinary. It moved in small, steady routines, each one stitched together with memory and quiet meaning. I had never traveled far or lived a life of luxury, but I devoted every part of myself to raising my daughter Mariah. I worked late nights cleaning office buildings, sold homemade pies at church gatherings, and repaired dresses for neighbors, all to give her opportunities one never had. To most people, I appeared to be nothing more than a quiet grandmother, but inside I carried decades of sacrifice. That Thursday evening was supposed to be special. I spent hours preparing Edwin's favorite chicken and dumplings, the same meal Mariah used to beg for when she was young. I spread out my embroidered tablecloth, the one I had worked on while Mariah was a teenager, and placed fresh flowers in the center of the table. I wanted to remind her that this was still her home, a place filled with love and shared memories. When they arrived, Cole walked straight to Edwin's old armchair, turned on the television, and behaved as though the house already belonged to him. Mariah stood nearby in the green dress I had bought for her, her expression distant and cold. She told me that we needed to have a serious conversation, speaking in a clipped tone that barely sounded like her own voice. She explained that the house was too large for me, that I could no longer take care of it properly, and that they needed the space for their growing family. She added that they had already found a retirement community suitable for someone my age. My voice shook as I reminded her that this was the home where her father had died while holding my hand, where every wall held our family's story. Her response was firm and dismissive, insisting that memories lived in the heart and not within the walls of a house. Only a few days later, Cole arrived without warning, bringing a real estate appraiser dressed in a gray suit. The man moved through my home as if it were already on the market, measuring rooms quickly and scribbling notes onto a clipboard. He stated bluntly that the pipes were outdated, that the kitchen tiles were old-fashioned, and that the entire house would require a full renovation. I stood quietly in the corner, gripping the edge of my apron. Those tiles he dismissed so easily had been placed one by Edwin's hands when Mariah was 10 years old. I remembered the sweat on his forehead, the patience in his smile, and the hope in his voice when he said that this kitchen would last us a lifetime. Now it had been reduced to a single item on a checklist. Mariah followed the appraiser closely, nodding along with his comments without ever looking at me. Every word felt like another blow. To them, my home was no longer sacred. It had become nothing more than numbers and profit. The following week they returned again, this time with a lawyer. Cole carried himself with the confidence of someone who already believed the house was his, while Mariah avoided my gaze entirely. The lawyer laid a stack of documents across my dining table and spoke with practiced politeness. He explained that these were the transfer papers and assured me that once I signed, everything would be taken care of for my comfort. As I looked over the pages, the words blurred together, but certain phrases stood out clearly. Transfer of ownership, permanent, irrevocable. My chest tightened as I realized this was never about selling the house to someone else. They intended to take it for themselves. When I refused, Cole's composure cracked. His voice hardened as he claimed I was no longer capable of making sound decisions and insisted that Mariah, as my heir, was acting in my best interest. The lawyer added in a quieter tone that if I continued to resist, they might need to pursue legal proceedings regarding my mental capacity. The room seemed to spin around me. My own daughter, the child I had worked myself ragged to raise, was preparing to take everything I had left. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to speak clearly and said that I would not sign anything. That night sleep refused to come. I sat in Edwin's armchair while the silence of the house settled over me like a heavy weight. For the first time I wondered if they were right, if I had become too old, too fragile, too insignificant to stand in their way. That thought hurt more deeply than any insult Cole had ever directed at me. My gaze drifted to the framed photographs on the wall. Mariah as a baby in my arms. Edwin smiling proudly at her graduation. Our family gathered together around the Christmas table. Every memory reminded me that I had spent my life giving everything to others. Now I was being treated like a burden. In the quiet, I softly spoke Edwin's name and admitted that I did not know how to face this alone. The following afternoon, as I moved through the house feeling invisible, I opened the drawer of Edwin's old desk. It contained the same faded bills, envelopes, and letters I had seen many times before. But beneath them rested a thin folder secured with a small lock, and the moment I saw it, my breath caught. I had never noticed it in all those years. I searched through the drawers, then checked the shelves, until I finally found a small brass key, hidden inside one of Edwin's favorite books on investing. My hand shook as I slid the key into the lock and turned it. The folder opened with a soft creak, revealing a neatly organized stack of documents, each marked with Edwin's initials in the corner. Most of the pages were contracts and statements I did not fully understand, but one document immediately drew my attention. It was a will, signed and dated 6 months before Edwin passed away. I lowered myself into the chair as I began to read. With each line, my understanding of everything shifted. Edwin had been far more cautious and far more intentional than I had ever known. What Mariah and Cole believed they could take from me was only a fraction of what Edwin had truly left behind. He had never spoken much about money. I always assumed we lived on his modest income, and whatever little I earned from odd jobs. But as I continued through the folder, the truth slowly revealed itself. For decades he had quietly invested every extra dollar, purchasing small properties when prices were low, buying company stocks, and even acquiring a piece of land outside Riverton that was now worth a great deal. The figures on the statements made my head spin. Yet the biggest shock was still waiting. The building where Mariah and Cole lived, the place they believed they were renting month after month, belonged to us. Every rent check had been directed into an account under Edwin's name, which was now mine. For 2 years after his death, rent from every tenant had been deposited without being touched, waiting for me. My heart raced as I realized I was not simply a widow holding on to one house. Edwin had left me an empire, one my daughter and her husband knew nothing about. At the bottom of the folder rested an envelope addressed in Edwin's familiar handwriting. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the letter, and it felt as though his voice rose directly from the page. He addressed me as his dearest Evelyn, explaining that if I was reading the letter, he was no longer beside me. He asked for forgiveness for keeping the secret, saying he wanted it to be a gift for my later years. He reminded me that I had worked harder than anyone he had ever known and had given everything for Mariah and for him. He wrote that he wanted me to live without fear and to always know I would be safe. He also admitted that he had never fully trusted Cole, sensing in him an ambition without compassion. That was why he arranged the inheritance the way he did. If Mariah treated me with love and respect, she would share in the legacy. If not, the power to protect myself would remain entirely in my hands, to be used wisely, not to harm but to teach. By dawn my decision was made. The tears from the night before had dried, replaced by a calm I had not felt in years. I brewed my coffee, watered the violets, and placed the folder neatly on Edwin's old desk. For the first time in a very long while, I felt steady and nearly unshakable. When Mariah and Cole arrived that morning with boxes and movers, expecting me to be packed and ready, they found me sitting calmly in my armchair, sipping tea as though nothing could disturb me. Mariah asked impatiently what I was doing and pointed out that the movers were already there. I replied evenly that I was not leaving. Cole stepped closer with a sharp smile, insisting that I had no choice. I met his eyes without flinching and told him that while it seemed I had no choice, it turned out he did not either. The mover stood awkwardly in the hallway, unsure how to proceed. Cole waved toward them, ordering them to start with the living room. I stopped him and slowly rose from my chair. Walking to Edwin's desk, I picked up one of the deeds and calmly asked if they knew that the apartment they had lived in for 3 years had never truly belonged to them. Cole's expression faltered. Mariah said they paid rent every month, clearly confused. I explained that the payments went to a management company that transferred the money directly to me, because I owned the entire building. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the quiet shifting of the mover's feet. Mariah stared at the document, reading it repeatedly. Cole snatched it from her, his face draining of color as understanding settled in. He snapped that the document had to be fake and accused me of bluffing. I told him calmly to check the public records and see for himself. His anger flared as he insisted that even if it were true, they would fight it in court and that I would lose everything. I folded my hands and informed him that he had 30 days to find another place to live, after which the law allowed me to evict them. Mariah gasped, panic filling her eyes, and insisted that I could not mean it. I answered firmly that family does not plot to take what does not belong to them, and that she had made her choice when she tried to force me out. Desperate, Cole urged Mariah to tell me why I could not do this. Her lips trembled as she revealed that she was pregnant. The words struck me deeper than any threat. I would be a grandmother, and yet I was hearing this as leverage. For a brief moment my resolve softened. Then Edwin's words echoed in my mind, reminding me not to hurt, but to teach. I straightened my shoulders and congratulated her, making it clear that this did not erase what had been done. Mariah turned toward Cole with tears in her eyes and suggested that they apologize and try to make things right. His face hardened as he refused, accusing me of manipulation. I remained silent, allowing his words to expose him. Mariah begged him to stop, reminding him that I was her mother, and that we could not be discarded so easily. He shouted back, calling her weak for even considering it. In that moment something changed in Mariah. For years, she had echoed his thoughts and shared his contempt. Now she looked at him as though seeing him clearly for the first time. Turning back to me, she admitted she had been wrong, that she let him convince her I was a burden because it was easier than admitting she married the wrong man. I swallowed and told her that words were only a beginning, and that only actions would prove she had chosen differently. 2 weeks later, Cole returned furious. The building manager called up to my apartment, his voice tense, telling me that Cole was demanding to be let in and claiming that his wife was being held against her will. I went down to the lobby feeling calm and steady. Cole was standing there, his eyes bloodshot, the heavy smell of alcohol clinging to his breath. He pointed a finger at me and demanded that I give his wife back immediately, threatening to have me arrested for kidnapping. I replied evenly that Mariah was exactly where she wanted to be and reminded him that he was standing on my property, which meant he needed to leave at once. He responded with a bitter laugh. He insisted that the building did not belong to me. Without saying another word, I called my attorney, Dana Holloway, and put the phone on speaker. I asked her to confirm who legally owned the building. She answered without hesitation, stating clearly that I was the sole legal owner. The manager's eyes widened as the truth settled in. Cole's mouth closed sharply. For the first time he had nothing to say. The weeks that followed were devoted to preparation. Cole filed a lawsuit, accusing me of manipulating Mariah, turning her against him, and intentionally destroying their marriage. He even threatened to pursue custody of the baby. The claims were outrageous, but I understood the importance of being prepared. Dana gathered everything. Text messages in which Cole insulted Mariah, voicemails where he threatened to leave her if she did not force me into a retirement home, and sworn statements from neighbors who had heard his shouting through the walls. Piece by piece, the truth was recorded. At my kitchen table, Dana coached me carefully, reminding me to answer directly without extra words, because the truth did not need embellishment. Mariah practiced beside me, her voice trembling as she read her statement aloud, admitting that she betrayed her mother after Cole convinced her that I was weak. She acknowledged that she had been wrong. Hearing her say it was painful, but it was necessary. The courtroom would accept nothing less than honesty. The morning of the trial arrived beneath heavy clouds. Cole walked in confidently with an expensive lawyer at his side, his arrogance fueling his posture. He looked at me with the same contempt I had seen for years, but this time I felt no fear. I had the truth. His attorney described me as a bitter old woman unable to let go, a manipulative mother who used money to destroy her daughter's marriage. The words hurt, but I remained silent and waited. When it was our turn, Dana stood with calm authority. She presented the evidence methodically. Messages filled with insults, recordings of threats, and witnesses prepared to testify. Each piece landed with weight, and Cole's smirk slowly disappeared. Then came a moment no one anticipated. The judge removed his glasses and studied me carefully. He addressed me by name, his voice softening, and asked whether I remembered him. He mentioned that 30 years earlier in family court Judge Whitmore's office, I had been the secretary who stayed late to help an overwhelmed intern. Recognition hit me at once. Beneath the gray hair and stern expression stood Jonathan Pierce, the young man I had once encouraged. I spoke his name quietly, my throat tight, and told him that of course I remembered. The courtroom went still. Cole's lawyer protested, claiming a conflict of interest, but Judge Pierce responded firmly that there was none. He stated clearly that the evidence showed Cole had been the manipulator all along. In that moment the balance of power shifted completely. It seemed that kindness had returned to me when I least expected it. Judge Pierce's ruling was swift and final. He dismissed every one of Cole's claims, stating there was no proof that I had manipulated Mariah or interfered in her marriage. Instead, he concluded that Cole had subjected both Mariah and me to intimidation, coercion, and emotional abuse. The gavel struck, finalizing the verdict. Cole was prohibited from approaching either of us, stripped of parental rights pending further review, and ordered to cover court costs along with damages for the harm he caused. His face turned pale as his confidence vanished. His lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but it no longer mattered. The fight was finished. Beside me, Mariah cried quietly as relief washed over her. I placed my hand over hers, not in celebration, but as a reminder that this moment was not the end. It was the beginning of repairing what had been broken. Outside the courthouse, she clung to me and whispered that we were free. Freedom, however, did not erase the wounds. When Mariah moved back into the house, the atmosphere between us was fragile, filled with unspoken uncertainty. I set clear boundaries, explaining that if she stayed, it would not be as a guest. She would contribute, take responsibility, and earn back my trust. She nodded with her eyes lowered. At first, our conversations were limited to necessities, the weather, groceries, and her morning sickness. Over time I noticed small changes. She washed her dishes immediately, kept her room tidy, and helped care for Edwin's violets without being asked. One afternoon, I found her folding laundry in the living room, something she had never done before. She looked up nervously and said that she wanted me to see she could take care of things on her own. It was not much, but it was a beginning. I reminded myself that actions, not words, would show whether my daughter had truly returned to me. As the months passed, I realized Edwin's legacy could not remain only within our family. Too many women like me had been silenced, discarded, or stripped of dignity by those they loved most. With Dana's guidance, I used part of the inheritance to create the Second Porch Foundation, a safe place for older women facing abandonment or abuse. We chose the name because every woman deserves another place to sit, to breathe, and to belong when her first porch is taken away. Within the first year, we provided housing for 15 women. Their stories echoed my own. Children who sold their parents' homes without consent, siblings who stole inheritances through lies, husbands who abandoned their wives when age made them inconvenient. Letters began arriving, thanking us for restoring hope. One woman wrote that we had given her back her name, reminding her she was not just a burden. Every message reinforced that my pain had become purpose. Edwin's gift was no longer only mine. It belonged to all of us. 5 years later, the garden in Riverton overflowed with color. My granddaughter Rowan, now 4 years old, ran barefoot across the grass chasing butterflies, her laughter filling the yard. Mariah stood on the porch steps, her hands dusted with flour from preparing Sunday lunch. She had rebuilt her life, returning to school and becoming an accountant at a small but successful firm, and more importantly, She had rediscovered the easy laughter of her childhood. That afternoon, an envelope arrived with my name written neatly on the front. It was an invitation to the dedication of the third second porch home. Many more women would soon find safety and dignity within those walls. Later that same week, Judge Jonathan Pierce arrived with his wife. He greeted me with a warm smile and told me that my work had inspired them all, explaining that the Retired Judges Association wanted to honor me for everything I had built. As Rowan climbed into my lap holding a yellow flower, I finally understood how far we had come. Pain had been transformed into legacy, and love had endured its greatest trial. Looking back now, I see clearly that real strength was never about raising my voice or fighting harder than others. It was about standing calmly with the truth in my hands and refusing to disappear. Edwin's letter had reminded me to use power not to wound, but to teach. That is exactly what I tried to do. Mariah learned that respect cannot be demanded or forced, and I learned that dignity is something we must defend for ourselves. If any part of my story feels familiar to you, remember this. You are not powerless. Even in the darkest moments, there is always a path to reclaim your voice, your place, and your worth. Sometimes life finds its way back to us through unexpected kindness, the way Judge Pierce remembered me after so many years. Sometimes victory is nothing more than refusing to be pushed aside. If this story meant something to you, I invite you to share it. Leave a comment, tell me where you are watching from, and subscribe if you would like to hear more. Together we can keep these lessons alive and remind the world that dignity never expires.